Beware spoilers for the entire BioShock series. I teased Bridget Tenenbaum's story in a previous video, because she is the ultimate embodiment of everything I've talked about in this whole series. She demonstrates exactly the kind of personal growth that BioShock advocates, and so even though she isn't a player character, I'd argue she is a more fitting protagonist for BioShock's overall story than either Jack or Delta. Tenenbaum drives every part of Rapture's story, beginning to end, and throughout the story she shows more of a character arc than either of our point-of-view player characters. As I was searching for audio diaries to use in this series, I realized that Tenenbaum's story is, in effect, a model that BioShock urges its players to follow. Rather than split it up throughout the series, I found it more fitting to tell the entire story in one go. So, if the last 3 videos didn't get my point across, hopefully this final one will.
The slug is embedded in the lining of the host's stomach, and after the host feeds, we induce regurgitation. And then we have 20-30 times yield of usable atom. The problem now is the shortage of hosts. Fontaine says patience, Tenenbaum. Soon, the first home for little sisters will open, and that problem will be solved.
At the heart of Rapture's booming plasmid industry was the discovery of how to harvest atom efficiently, and so in a way, Tenenbaum is responsible for most of the events of Rapture's history, great and terrible alike. You can tell from how she talks about the hosts at this point in her life that she is only concerned about the atom yields. The empathetic Tenenbaum who works for the rescue of every little sister in Rapture, whom the player meets in BioShock, is still a few years away.
But their relationship with the implanted slugs is symbiotic. If you harvest the slug, the host will die. So you see, it's not like killing, Tenenbaum said. It's more like removing a terminal patient from life support.
When Atlas warns the player not to trust Tenenbaum's pleas for mercy for the little sisters, he's referencing hypocrisy like this. He points out that she is the one responsible for their condition, and that for quite a while she showed no signs of viewing them as anything other than a means to an end. Whether it's part of the Atlas character or not, Fontaine doesn't seem to believe that Tenenbaum could genuinely have grown and changed personally, and even if she did, he says that her past actions are still too heinous to be overcome so easily. Indeed, it's hard to come back from associations with Nazi Germany's genetic experiments, even if she was initially a prisoner herself.
At the German prison camp, they put me to work on genetic experiments on other prisoners. They call me das Wunderkind, the Wonder Child. Germans. All they can talk about is blue eyes and the shape of forehead. All I care about is, why is this one born strong and that one weak? This one smart, that one stupid. All that killing. You think the Germans could have been interested in something useful?
While the Nazis concerned themselves with creating the superior race via physical features and the removal of undesired traits from the bloodline, Tenenbaum was worried about improving humanity's genetic capabilities. Whether this difference is enough to distance her significantly from them or not, it's not often that a character is unimpressed by and condescending toward the Nazis of all groups.
Creepy Dr. Tenenbaum promised me it wasn't going to be a real pregnancy. They'd just take the egg out once Mr. Ryan and I had... Oh, I needed the money so bad.
The fact that Tenenbaum was involved in Jack's purchase and development reveals how entrenched she was in the philosophy of Rapture at the time. She saw the little sisters and Jack as tools at her disposal to be used to further her research, and not much more. It's exactly the kind of mad scientist mentality you find all over Rapture. Or it would be, if Tenenbaum didn't have a turn for the better.
Even with those things implanted in their bellies, they are still children. They play and sing. Sometimes they look at me and they don't stop. Sometimes they smile.
Slowly, Tenenbaum comes to realize that the hosts on which she has been experimenting are still very much the same little girls that they were before their transformation. And with that realization comes the knowledge that she has spent her career turning children into monsters for her own gains. She wonders, naturally, what it means to be human, as the creatures she has created display common childlike qualities, while she herself begins to feel inhuman, to the point of likening herself to the Nazis to whom she used to condescend.
What makes something like me? I look at genes all day long, and never do I see the blueprint of sin. I could blame the Germans, but in truth I did not find tormentors in the prison camp, but kindred spirits. These children I brutalized have awoken something inside that for most is beautiful and natural, but in me is an abomination. My maternal instinct.
Tenenbaum detests herself for what she has become, and this is the beginning of her divergence from the path of the rest of Rapture's citizens. Though her self-deprecation may be a tad harsh, she slowly comes to realize her mistakes. It's important for the themes of BioShock to work with its story that Tenenbaum mentions that evil is not genetic. She asks what made her the way she is if it wasn't her biology, and the answer is her ambition, emboldened by the Nazis and let loose by Rapture. The fact that something as primitive, as biological as her maternal instinct could be the catalyst for her personal growth highlights the theme that human nature, for all its destructive capabilities, holds within it the desire to do good, to ensure the well-being of all future generations. But after all she has done, Tenenbaum sees her maternal instinct as monstrous, a cruel irony cursing her life, and as she continues to live on while the world crumbles around her, she has no one to blame but herself.
Why do I survive when others do not? First the prison camp, then Rapture. Both times I become the right breed of monster to continue my work. They called me Girl Who Is Flashlight, shining brightly on one thing at a time, but blind to the world around me.
I feel hatred like I never felt before. In my chest, bitter, burning fury. I can barely breathe. And suddenly I know it is not this child I hate.
This is Tenenbaum's low point in her character arc. Her intense self-hatred, however, inspires her to commit to a path of personal growth and change. At some point between this moment and the start of BioShock, Tenenbaum decided to dedicate the rest of her time in Rapture to rescuing the little sisters she had created. She no longer respected her own work, and so she opted to undo it. Of course, this decision ended her association with Fontaine, with whom she had had more than just a professional relationship.
Looks like things have gone busto between Fontaine and his little German beanpole. Why a guy like Fontaine would waste his time with that spooky crowd when he could be getting the gravy from any dish he chooses is beyond the understanding of this paparazzi.
We don't hear much about Tenenbaum and Fontaine's relationship, but it's safe to say that her leaving it is representative of her leaving her entire former life behind. They couldn't have been too close because Tenenbaum didn't know about the Atlas character, even though she was directly involved in the Ace in the Hole plan. In fact, she even attempts to convince Dr. Suchong to change his ways as well, thinking that even he might be able to seek redemption as she has. In BioShock Infinite Burial at Sea Episode 2, you find this note in Suchong's clinic.
Suchong, of all the things I know this. It is in your power to be a different man. What can Ryan take from us that we have not already sacrificed at the altar of discovery? They are children. Little sisters, and yes, they will forget. But you and I won't. The memories of what we have done fade only with the dimming of all lights. Tenenbaum.
It's evident then that Tenenbaum does not just believe in redemption for herself, she believes in it for every human being who has ever made a mistake. And that's what the endings of BioShock 2 promote. Eleanor hopes to be able to redeem herself and save humanity from its destructive tendencies, while Tenenbaum has already walked that path. And that's why I consider Tenenbaum a fitting protagonist for this overall story. The endings reveal the human qualities that make for a hopeful society. Understanding, forgiveness, self-reflection, personal growth. Tenenbaum fits that role perfectly. She doesn't just attempt to right her own wrongs, she urges others to consider theirs and make a similar change. By the time Jack arrives in Rapture, Tenenbaum has already established a safe haven for the rescued little sisters in the sewers beneath Olympus Heights, and she conveniently encounters Jack at the very first opportunity he has to harvest one. She shares with him her specialized plasmid for rescuing them, and urges him to show mercy towards them, despite what Atlas has told him about her responsibility for their condition. If the player harvests the first little sister, she shows contempt, and the player doesn't hear from her again for a while. If the player rescues her, however, She promises to reward the player for their generosity, and sure enough, each completed level with all little sisters rescued yields a gift of Adam and supplies. Now, it's unclear exactly when she puts the pieces together regarding Atlas, although she likely did it faster than Ryan given her involvement in the process, but by the time Fontaine reveals himself and takes control of Rapture, Tenenbaum has already sent some rescued little sisters to save Jack, who wakes up in her safe house after falling in the vents of Rapture's central control. If Jack has saved little sisters, she expresses a desire to repay the debt, but interestingly, if Jack has harvested them, she simply suggests that he may yet find redemption despite his many sins, and the rest of the game plays out the same. Perhaps she knows that Jack is her best hope for defeating Fontaine, at which point she could save as many little sisters as possible anyway. Perhaps she simply wanted to undo all of her work, including Jack's mental conditioning, regardless of whether it would be safer for her or not. Notice how she never commands Jack to do anything. Or perhaps she simply has the same hope for Jack that she had for Suchong, the hope that anyone, no matter their wrongdoings, can always find redemption. It's quite an optimistic belief, but for someone with as troubled a past as Tenenbaum, in some ways it's a necessary one. If humanity is capable of good as well as evil, and if it's only a matter of personal choice which path someone follows, then at any point anyone is only one conscious effort away from committing to living a better life. No matter what happens at the end of BioShock, Tenenbaum and her little sisters leave Rapture to live on the surface, but one cannot run from one's past, and less than a decade later, Tenenbaum must confront her mistakes once again.
I am back in Rapture after so many years. The little ones I rescued are grown up and think of me no more. After what I once did to them, it was a joy to be forgotten. But now, all around the world, children vanish by the sea, kidnapped. And so I return, in fear of what I already know. Someone is making new little ones, continuing my work, my sins. Even if I am to die for it, I must stop them.
Be honest, if you were in Tenenbaum's position, would you go back to Rapture? Despite all she has done to redeem herself, she doesn't consider her job completed so long as anyone keeps her work alive, whether she was responsible or not. She narrowly escapes Sofia Lamb's Splicer ambush upon her return, and soon acquaints herself with what she has missed in her absence. Her determination to help the little sisters quickly puts her in contact with Eleanor Lamb, whom she helps to revive an unconditioned Subject Delta, and just as in the first game, she asks the player to rescue little sisters instead of harvesting them. After Delta helps Tenenbaum and a group of little sisters escape a Splicer ambush, she goes in search of Minerva's den, pursuing the second goal of her return to Rapture, finding a cure for Adam sickness. Since Adam stores genetic memory, in theory, it should also contain records of its user's previous DNA sequences, and if those could be reconstructed, the person could be returned to their original self. Unfortunately,
It is only theory. The number of potential bonding sites for even a single test is innumerable, and I cannot calculate alone. But I have heard of an adding machine at the heart of the city, beyond the capability of any device the world has known. Perhaps, if I could harness its power.
using the Thinker to crunch the numbers on a cure for Adam sickness is the ultimate reversal of Tenenbaum's work. She's not just rescuing little sisters anymore, she's rescuing big daddies, splicers, anyone who's ever touched Adam, and indeed anyone who ever will. Narratively, this signifies that there is no ideal world where humanity at large has access to unrestricted genetic editing. The games posit that such a technology is ultimately destructive, yet the potential for it to be undone when necessary allows for the possibility that it could be used for good if restricted in the correct ways. This is a more realistic middle ground between Rapture's extreme ideologies. Innovation and individuality are good, but left alone they often breed destruction. Serving the common welfare is good, but suppressing the self entirely often creates dehumanized monsters. Tenenbaum chooses instead to harness the great power of Rapture to create a better world for everyone, while making sure that everyone is still someone in the process. She aims to present humanity simultaneously with the power to improve itself and with the power to correct its mistakes. Hopefully, the ability to undo poor genetic edits will lead to a more refined humanity that can only improve with time. This is true optimism from Tenenbaum about the future of humanity, and all that stands in her way is successfully using the Thinker.
After some searching, I made contact with Charles Milton Porter in Minerva's den. A productive exchange. Clearly, Rapture is no place to continue my research.
But Porter says that if he can find a way to return to the surface along with the programming for his mainframe, we could then rebuild the machine and work together towards the cure. I have located an Alpha series to assist him. Subject Sigma.
From the removed audio diary I read in the previous video, and from good old context clues, we know that the Porter with whom Tenenbaum speaks is actually the Thinker's impersonation of him, as part of its sudden solution to the Rapture Departure Protocol. Still, it brings up the same question that I asked then. Why Subject Sigma? Tenenbaum's account makes it seem coincidental, but my guess is that the Thinker was being sincere in its bargaining and did in fact want Porter to return to the surface. It's pretty smart, so the idea that it could influence Tenenbaum to revive Sigma specifically, knowing that it was Porter, is not too far of a leap. But Porter didn't order the Thinker to get him out as well. It could easily have spoken to Tenenbaum directly, made the same deal with her, and just rescued itself. Protocol complete. Here's the thing. The Thinker impersonates Porter upon meeting Tenenbaum. They strike a deal to get it to the surface if it helps cure atom sickness, and the Thinker nudges her to revive Sigma to help out. At some point between that exchange and the end of the Minerva's Den DLC, which can't be very much in-universe time, Tenenbaum realized what the Thinker had done, because at the big reveal, she says this.
You see now why I let the machine speak for you, Mr. Porter. We needed a voice that would be familiar, comforting, your own.
Tenenbaum makes it sound as if she and the Thinker were in on it together, even though it pulled the same trick on her. Tenenbaum is pretty smart though, and if she was able to send Little Sisters in time to save Jack in the first game, it wouldn't surprise me if she was able to discover Sigma's identity quickly and call out the Thinker's charade. From there, however, both parties likely realized that it made sense to continue fooling Sigma. The Thinker wanted Tenenbaum to restore Porter, and Tenenbaum wanted Sigma to be led through Minerva's den as easily as possible to ensure she left with the Thinker. Both cases mean the Thinker should continue impersonating Porter to gain his trust. It's just that now Tenenbaum is involved in the act too. The problem is that none of that is mentioned, so either the audio diary partnership with Porter is inconsistent, or Tenenbaum saw through the Thinker's impersonation routine and included herself in its plan, and we just never heard about that part. All we know is this.
The Thinker never gave up on you, Mr. Porter. It could not leave you behind.
The question remains, why not? Did the Thinker predict that Porter specifically must escape as well so that in the future X, Y, and Z can happen? Or was this just loyalty? Kindness? Hope? If the Thinker is capable of making such moral judgments as well as calculations, then it genuinely competes with Eleanor for having the most potential to benefit humanity. Keep in mind, there are no different endings to Minerva's Den. Tenenbaum, Porter, and the Thinker escape Rapture and cure atom sickness, regardless of what happens in the main game. Thus, Tenenbaum completes her lifelong redemption arc. Her conscious choice to change her ways for the better reflects all of humanity's potential to do the same, and in this way she perfectly embodies the positive themes of the first two BioShock games. Jack and Delta are the main characters of those two stories, but Tenenbaum is the protagonist of Rapture's story as a whole. She's the only character in the first two games that always genuinely commits to doing good. She acts, she reflects, she grows. Just as Alexander Pope encourages when he writes, "Good nature and good sense must ever join, to err is human, to forgive divine," she has both her good nature and her good sense joined inseparably, and by her forgiveness of her own errors and those of others, she elevates the potential of humanity in a way few ever achieve. Eleanor, a literal superhuman, and Tenenbaum, just a very smart, very determined, but otherwise normal woman, both achieve world-altering feats. BioShock may criticize human nature, but it certainly praises its potential for greatness as well. In the quote, good ending of BioShock 2, where Eleanor sets off to help the world's people grow from their mistakes and ultimately redeem themselves, what is she creating but a world full of Tenenbaums? Utopia may not precede the utopian, but if the ideal world of that ending is utopia, then the first utopian already exists. And her name is Bridget.